What if everything you believed about Italian identity was a lie? One land, one people, one unbroken bloodline. That's the story they told us. It sounds beautiful, doesn't it? A single thread running from Rome to Renaissance to the modern day. But what if that thread was never real? Because when scientists began pulling DNA from the bones of Italy's past, the story unraveled. And what they found wasn't purity, it was chaos. Layer after layer of migrations, invasions, hidden romances carved into the genome, rewriting what it means to be Italian. Here's the shocker. Italians are among the most genetically diverse people in all of Europe, more variation inside Italy than across entire nations. Think about that, the same passport, the same anthem, yet genes whisper a different truth. Why does this matter? Because that myth of one bloodline, it wasn't born in antiquity. It was engineered by politics, sculpted by nationalism, painted into school books. But the body keeps secrets that borders cannot erase. And those secrets take us far beyond Rome, beyond history itself. Hidden in that double helix is a map not of one journey, but of 1,000. Some so old they predate civilization, some so violent they reshaped entire cultures overnight. And some so unexpected they make us question the very idea of Italian. Imagine this. Buried deep in the DNA of modern Italians is evidence of people who walked this land 20,000 years ago. Survivors of an ice age, clinging to warmth in mountain caves while glaciers swallowed Europe whole. You've never seen that Italy. You were never told about those ancestors. But their genes are still here, pulsing beneath the skin of modern life. And that's just the beginning, because every stone in the Colosseum, every church dome in Florence, every plate of pasta, they all rest on a foundation of migrations no one ever taught you. So, if Italy isn't one bloodline, if the myth was always a mask, then the question becomes, where did this astonishing diversity begin? The last question still hangs in the air. Where did this astonishing diversity begin? To find the answer, we have to go back, far back, before Rome, before the first farmer ever set foot on Italian soil, before history even had a name. Picture this. The world locked in ice, winds carving mountains like knives, glaciers swallowing continents, and yet, in a narrow strip of warmth here, in the heart of Italy, life clings to the edge. They were few, fragile, but they endured. Huddled in caves, wrapped in animal hides, they fought a war against extinction and won. These were the survivors of the last glacial maximum, almost 19,000 years ago. The ancestors nobody told you about. And here's the secret, their DNA still whispers. Survival changes you. These Ice Age Italians rewired their biology to live in a frozen world. Their bodies learned to hoard heat, burn fat, manage insulin like clockwork, because one mistake meant death in the snow. You can still trace those genetic echoes in northern Italians today. But as the ice began to die, something extraordinary happened. The glaciers retreated, forests returned, and these survivors didn't stay in their shelters, they moved northward, out of their refuges. Pouring into the empty lands of Europe, Italians weren't just bystanders in prehistory, they became its architects. Italy was a lifeboat, and when the storm ended, that lifeboat launched a fleet. Those first migrations carried Italian blood across the continent, seeding Europe with a legacy no one remembers. And yet, the story isn't simple, because even then, the peninsula began to fracture. The north walked one road, shaped by cold and isolation. The south, bathed in a gentler sun, walked another. Two Italies, born before farming, before cities, before language itself. But nature was only the first author of this drama. The next chapter didn't arrive on a glacier, it came from across the sea, a force that would erase the old world and plant the seeds of something new. Because soon, strangers came bearing a gift so powerful, it would change not just Italy, but the future of Europe. This wasn't just the birth of farming, it was the birth of a new people. The ice had retreated, forests stretched across the land, and for a moment it seemed the old world would endure. But then they arrived. Not hunters, not warriors, carriers of something far more dangerous and far more seductive. Seeds. Around 7,000 years ago, strangers from Anatolia crossed the blue shimmer of the Mediterranean and set foot on Italy's southern shores. They didn't bring swords. They brought wheat, goats, olive trees, gifts that could feed armies and rewrite destinies. But here's the twist. It wasn't just their crops that took root, it was their blood. These Neolithic pioneers didn't blend gently with the hunters who ruled Italy's hills. They buried them, slowly, in the silence of genetics. One generation at a time, a new lineage rose, carrying the imprint of Anatolia deep into the heart of the peninsula. And while the south opened its arms, one island kept the secret: Sardinia, a fragment of stone in the Tyrrhenian Sea, cradling a genetic time capsule. For millennia, Sardinia barely changed. It became a vault for Europe's first farmers, so pure that even today, Sardinians are closer to those Neolithic ancestors than anyone else alive. Closer even than the frozen man in the Alps Ötzi, the Iceman whose DNA whispers the same ancient song. Imagine that. While Europe convulsed with migrations, Sardinia stood still, a ghost of the Stone Age, breathing in modern blood. And this is where the story splits. In the south, the Mediterranean's tides pulled in genes from far horizons. In the north, isolation carved a different destiny, sharper, colder, harder. A genetic fault line born thousands of years before the first Roman stone was laid, and still pulsing in Italian veins today. You think the story ends here, that this was the last great shift? Not even close. Because just as Italy was settling, just as these farmers sowed their quiet empire, an unexpected wave stormed in from the steppes. They came with horses, metal, and something invisible. At first, there was silence. Then, the thunder. Hooves pounding like war drums across the plains of Europe. From the vast grass oceans of the Pontic Steppe, they surged westward riders cloaked in wind and fire, bearing a power no army could see, but every generation would feel. Language, blood, a new genetic order. 4,000 years ago, these nomads crashed into northern Italy like a storm breaking through stone. They didn't just bring bronze and chariots, they carried a lineage written in a single letter, R1b, a paternal marker that would become the signature of Europe's future. Today, it pulses in the veins of most Italians above the Po. But here's the paradox: their genes conquered, yet their culture did not. They planted the seeds of Italic tribes, reshaped tongues into Indo-European roots. And still, in the heart of the north, a voice refused to die: the Etruscans. They spoke a language no invader could bend, a tongue older than the riders who carried new blood into their bones. Imagine that contradiction: warriors rewriting your DNA, while your words cling like ivy to the ruins of an ancient world. And the south? The storm barely touched it. While Lombardy and Piedmont bent to this steppe tide, Calabria and Sicily stood apart, tethered to the blue breath of the Mediterranean. Two Italies now, split not by borders, but by blood. How does a culture survive when its genes don't? How does a language echo when its speakers become someone else? But before we answer, the wind shifts again, because while the north trembled under the weight of these riders, something was stirring in the south, soft, seductive, and unstoppable. Not from the grasslands, from across the sea. This wasn't invasion, this was seduction. It began with ships sleek, white-sailed ghosts gliding across the Ionian blue. They carried no armies, only architects, poets, and a dream of new cities. By the 8th century BCE, Greece had run out of room to breathe, so it spilled across the Mediterranean, planting colonies in Sicily and Calabria, weaving stone into coastlines that still whisper in marble. They called it Magna Graecia, Greater Greece. But this wasn't just culture taking root, it was blood. Every child born in those glittering colonies carried a genetic thread that still binds the South to the Aegean. Y chromosomes like EV13 and J2, markers of a Balkan and Greek legacy, now flow through the veins of Calabria, Apulia, Sicily. This wasn't just migration, it was identity sculpted in flesh. And here's the part that takes your breath away. Southern Italians today are the closest living relatives of the ancient Greeks. Closer than Athens, closer than Sparta. The Aegean lives not in statues, but in the DNA of Naples and Palermo. Picture the split. The north tethered to Europe, the south anchored to the Greek Isles. Two Italies gazing in opposite directions, one toward the Alps, the other across the wine-dark sea. But the Mediterranean is never a one-way mirror. From the Levant came Phoenician traders, threading their genes into Sicilian soil. From Carthage, North African pulses crept into island bloodlines, faint but eternal. It was a world spinning faster, voices clashing on the wind. And then Rome rose, not as a city, not as a kingdom, but as an empire that would rip open the gates of the known world and pour it all into the Italian gene pool. Rome didn't just conquer the world, it brought the world home. Step into a Roman street and listen. Latin hums in the air, but so does Greek, Aramaic, Berber. By the time the Caesars ruled, Rome wasn't a city. It was a gravitational force, dragging humanity into its orbit. The shock? DNA proves it. Half the people buried in imperial Rome, half were not from Italy at all. They came from the eastern Mediterranean, from Syria, Anatolia, Judea, and North Africa. Think about that. A capital city where the blood of Carthage and Corinth, of Alexandria and Jerusalem flowed together under the shadow of the Colosseum. Imagine the faces skin-kissed by African sun, eyes carved from Aegean marble, speaking 100 tongues, all beneath one empire. It was history's first great genetic melting pot, a human experiment on a scale the world had never seen. But here's the riddle that haunts geneticists. If Rome was so diverse, if its streets were a living map of the ancient world, why do modern Italians still carry regional signatures so sharp they can tell Calabria from Lombardy? Where did all that cosmopolitan blood go? Because when the empire collapsed, something happened that no historian saw coming, something in the DNA itself. And it changed the story forever. They came as conquerors, they left as ancestors. The empire was dust, roads crumbling, statues cracking, legions scattered like broken spears. And through that silence came the thunder of new boots, the Lombards, the Goths, the Germanic tribes sweeping down from the frozen north. They came with iron, with laws older than Latin, with gods carved from ice and fear. And yet, when their swords rusted, when their banners fell, they didn't vanish, they stayed. Their blood lingers even now, faint but undeniable markers like I1 and R1A, northern whispers etched into the DNA of Lombardy and Piedmont. But here's the paradox. Their genes seeped into the soil, while their world, those savage oaths, those runic prayers, died in the fields they conquered. Picture it. Gothic warriors, battle-scarred and wolf-eyed, now walking through vineyards, their children speaking not in Germanic growls, but in the soft cadence of a new tongue. Italy didn't bow to them, it bent then made them Italian. And yet, the North still carries their echo, a genetic reminder that even the fiercest invaders can be tamed by the land they tried to rule. But the story doesn't end in the Alps, because while these tribes left their modest mark in the north, the south was stirring with something far more radical, a tide rolling in under Sicilian skies. A force that wasn't just foreign, it was from another world. The next arrivals wouldn't come on horseback. They would come by sea shadows from the east, bringing a new faith, a new blood, and a new war for the soul of Italy. Under Sicily's sun, East met West in a dance of power and blood. It began in 827, black sails on a burning horizon. The Arabs came not as traders this time, but as conquerors sweeping across Sicily like a tide of fire and gold. They brought architecture, language, and a sliver of Africa itself. DNA signatures like EM81 still whisper of that era, a genetic ember glowing beneath Sicilian skin. For 2 centuries, Sicily pulsed with Islamic breath palaces inscribed in Arabic, mosques echoing with prayer. And yet, inside the palaces, a secret churned: endogamy. Arab rulers keeping bloodlines pure, their genes circling in silence, while local women became the bridge between 2 worlds. Then, in a twist no poet could script, the north struck back. Norman knights, Vikings turned kings, stormed the island. They brought I1, the lineage of the fjords, and carved crosses into minarets. Picture Palermo's royal palace today, golden mosaics of Christ glowing beneath Arabic arches, Norman frescoes kissing Quranic calligraphy. This was Sicily, the crossroads of empires, where every conquest left a fingerprint, yet never erased the last. A place so layered that modern DNA still hums with that chaos: African shadows, Viking steel, Arab silk, all in one strand of blood. But even with these storms, even with centuries of invasions, Italy clung to something untouchable, something that no sword, no creed, no empire could erase. And the secret, it's still hiding in the mountains and islands, waiting for us to find it. Hidden in the mountains and islands, time stood still. While empires rose and shattered, while bloodlines tangled in the lowlands, there were places that refused to move, places where the past dug in its roots and whispered across the centuries. High in the Alps, under a skin of ice, they found him, Ötzi, a man who walked the Copper Age more than 5,000 years ago, his body frozen like a question mark in the snow. And when scientists cracked his genetic code, the revelation hit like a ghost. For 2,000 years, his lineage lived almost unchanged in those valleys, a genetic heartbeat echoing through time. And further south, another sanctuary, Sardinia, a fragment of land that became Europe's genetic time capsule. While the continent convulsed with wars and migrations, Sardinia stood still. Its people locked in a Neolithic melody, their DNA, a fossilized song unchanged for millennia. Imagine that. While the world turned, their blood kept playing the same note. These refuges aren't just history lessons, they shape the present. The regions with the oldest genes are home to some of the world's longest living people. It's as if the secret to longevity isn't in a diet, but in the deep roots of time. Science meets soul here, because in these valleys and islands, you aren't just looking at faces, you're looking at echoes, at strands of life that defied extinction, bending but never breaking. And yet, just when we thought we had mapped it all, when the story of Italy's DNA seemed almost complete, scientists uncovered something that rewrites everything we thought we knew. This isn't the Italy you learned in school. It's older and stranger. Deep inside the genome, past the obvious threads of Europe and the Mediterranean, scientists found a ghost, a layer no one expected. Bronze Age signatures tied not to Greece, not to the Balkans, but to the Caucasus, to Iranian plateaus, to the shadow of Anatolia, long before empires were born. It changes everything. because it means Italy wasn't just shaped by Rome or Greece or even the Steppe. It was a bridge to the east, a meeting ground of worlds we thought were separate. This peninsula didn't just hold Europe together, it stitched continents. Identity isn't purity, it's 1,000 migrations, 1,000 stories carved into blood. And every time science digs deeper, that map grows stranger, richer, more human. So what does that make us? If Italian DNA carries whispers from Anatolia and Persia, from Vikings and Arabs, from Africa and Ice Age hunters, what does your DNA hide? Because here's the truth, these secrets aren't finished. They're still unfolding, and the next chapter may challenge everything we think we know about Europe itself. If you're fascinated by these mysteries, if you want to see the stories written in blood, subscribe, because this journey is just beginning.